My neighbor reported me to the HOA to try and ruin my property value. My name is Michael Blackwood, and I've lived in the same quiet suburban neighborhood for the past 15 years. When my wife Jessica and I first moved in, we fell in love with the quaint, tree-lined streets and the close-knit community vibe. We poured our hearts and souls into making our house a home, meticulously maintaining the landscaping, repainting the exterior every few years, and even undertaking a few major renovations to modernize the interior. It was a labor of love, and I took immense pride in our property. From the moment we arrived, our next-door neighbor, Evelyn Westbrook, seemed determined to make our lives difficult. She was an older widow, perpetually dissatisfied with the world around her, and she wasted no time in making her disapproval of our family known. Evelyn would scowl whenever I was out tending to the yard, and she made snide comments about our gaudy choice of exterior paint colors. At first, Jessica and I tried to be polite, even going so far as to bake her a housewarming cake when we moved in. But Evelyn's frosty demeanor and unwillingness to engage in even the most basic neighborly niceties soon made it clear that she had no interest in being friends. Over the years, Evelyn's disdain for us only seemed to grow. She would complain to the Homeowners Association, HOA, about the slightest infraction, from the height of our hedges to the placement of our recycling bins. Each time the HOA would send us a stern warning, and I'd dutifully comply, trimming the bushes, or rearranging the trash cans, hoping to keep the peace. But Evelyn was relentless, and it became increasingly clear that her goal was not to uphold the neighborhood's aesthetic standards, but to make our lives as difficult as possible. Despite Evelyn's constant harassment, Jessica and I tried our best to rise above it. We knew that our home was our sanctuary, a place where we could find solace and respite from the stresses of the outside world. I poured my energy into cultivating a beautiful, well-maintained property, taking pride in the way our house and yard complemented the overall charm of the neighborhood. Whenever Evelyn would come out to glare at us from her porch, we'd simply smile and wave, refusing to let her negativity dampen our spirits. As the years passed, our home became a source of immense joy and satisfaction. We watched our children grow up, playing in the backyard and hosting neighborhood barbecues in the summer. I took great pride in the way our house had evolved, each renovation and landscaping project a testament to our dedication and hard work. And through it all, Evelyn remained a constant thorn in our side, her disdain for us only seeming to intensify as our home became more and more beautiful. Then, about a year ago, things took a sinister turn. I was out in the garden pruning the rose bushes when I noticed Evelyn standing on her porch, a self-satisfied smirk on her face. It was the look of someone who had just accomplished something they'd been plotting for a long time. My stomach twisted with unease, and I couldn't help but wonder what she was up to. A few days later, the answer became painfully clear. I received a letter from the HOA informing me that they had received multiple complaints about the condition of our property. Apparently, Evelyn had taken issue with the height of our hedges, the placement of our trash cans, and even the color of our front door, all things I had painstakingly maintained to the HOA's specifications. The letter went on to threaten fines and potential legal action if we didn't rectify the issues immediately. I was stunned. We had always been diligent about adhering to the HOA's guidelines, and now we were being singled out and threatened with penalties. As I stared at the letter, a sinking feeling began to take hold. I knew in my gut that Evelyn was behind this, that her relentless campaign of complaints was not about upholding neighborhood standards, but about something much more sinister. But what could she possibly hope to gain? It was an exhausting and demoralizing experience. I'd spend hours meticulously trimming the hedges, only to receive another letter a week later about their height being out of compliance. I'd carefully arrange the trash cans, ensuring they were tucked neatly out of sight, only to find that Evelyn had filed a new complaint about their placement. With each new violation, the fines grew larger and the pressure began to mount. I knew that if this continued, the HOA could ultimately slap us with hefty penalties or even threaten legal action. The thought of losing our beloved home, a place we had worked so hard to build, was a constant source of anxiety. As the situation unfolded, I started to notice subtle changes in Evelyn's behavior. She seemed almost giddy, a malicious glint in her eye, every time a new HOA notice arrived at our door. And on the rare occasions when we would cross paths in the neighborhood, she would offer me a sickly sweet smile as if to say, "I've got you right where I want you." It was then that the realization dawned on me. Evelyn's complaints weren't about upholding neighborhood standards at all. This was a calculated, premeditated attack, and her true motive was to undermine the value of our property. I couldn't help but wonder if she was planning to swoop in and buy our house at a discounted price once the HOA had worn us down enough to force us to sell. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. Evelyn had always been resentful of our home, the way it seemed to outshine her own modest abode, and now, with the HOA breathing down our necks, the value of our property was steadily declining. It was a devious plan, and I had to hand it to her. Evelyn was playing the long game, methodically chipping away at our dreams of home ownership. I shared my suspicions with Jessica, and she was equally outraged. We had poured our hearts and souls into this house, and the thought of losing it to Evelyn's underhanded scheming was almost too much to bear. But as the anger and frustration bubbled up inside me, a new determination began to take hold. I was no longer going to sit back and let Evelyn walk all over us. This was our home, our sanctuary, and I was damned if I was going to let her ruin it. I needed to find a way to fight back, to expose her true motives and put an end to her relentless campaign of harassment. That's when I decided to take a closer look at the HOA's policies and procedures. I spent hours poring over the bylaws, searching for any loopholes or technicalities that could work in our favor, and as I delved deeper, I started to uncover a disturbing pattern. Evelyn had a long history of filing frivolous complaints against her neighbors, often targeting the most vulnerable members of the community. It was a revelation that filled me with a sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for our home anymore. I was fighting for the rights of every homeowner in our neighborhood who had been victimized by Evelyn's ruthless tactics. And with that realization, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I reached out to a local real estate attorney, someone with a reputation for taking on tough cases and standing up to bullies like Evelyn. As I laid out the details of our situation, the lawyer's eyes narrowed with understanding. "This woman has been running a harassment campaign," he said, his voice low and serious, "and we're going to put a stop to it." With the lawyer's guidance, I began to meticulously document every single one of Evelyn's complaints, cataloging the HOA's responses and the financial impact it had on our household. I knew that if I was going to take her down, I would need to do it with an ironclad case, one that would leave no doubt in the HOA's mind that Evelyn was acting in bad faith. As I compiled the evidence, a sense of grim determination settled over me. Evelyn had underestimated me, and she was about to learn a very hard lesson, that you don't mess with a man who is fighting to protect his home and his family. As I delved deeper into Evelyn's history of complaints, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. It wasn't just our family that she had targeted. She had a long track record of going after her neighbors, particularly those who were newer to the community or more vulnerable. I discovered that just a few years ago, she had filed a series of complaints against an elderly couple down the street, ultimately forcing them to sell their home at a significant loss. And before that, she had set her sights on a young family with small children, badgering them with HOA violations until they simply couldn't afford to stay. The more I uncovered, the clearer Evelyn's true motives became. This wasn't about maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. It was about systematically targeting homeowners and driving down property values so that she could swoop in and purchase the homes at a fraction of their worth. It was a devious, calculated plan, and the realization sent a chill down my spine. Evelyn wasn't just trying to ruin our home. She was trying to dismantle the very foundation of our community, one family at a time. As I shared my findings with the real estate attorney, he let out a low whistle. "This woman is a predator," he said, shaking his head. "And you're not the first person she's gone after." Armed with this new information, we began to dig even deeper, scouring property records and real estate listings for any connections between Evelyn and the homes she had targeted. And that's when we made a startling discovery. The houses that had been sold under duress were all eventually purchased by a company called Westbrook Properties, a real estate investment firm that, as it turned out, was owned by none other than Evelyn Westbrook herself. It was a revelation that left me feeling both outraged and deeply unsettled. Evelyn had been playing a long game, using the HOA as a weapon to systematically undermine her neighbors and line her own pockets. And the worst part was, she had been doing it right under our noses the entire time. As I shared this information with Jessica, I could see the same mix of emotions playing across her face. She was angry, yes, but there was also a sense of disbelief, a reluctance to accept that someone could be so deeply, deliberately cruel. How could she do this? she asked, her voice trembling. How could she just destroy people's lives like that? I wish I had an answer for her, but the truth was I couldn't understand it either. Evelyn's actions were so far beyond the realm of basic human decency that it was almost impossible to comprehend. This wasn't just about a petty neighborhood dispute. It was about a calculated campaign of financial and emotional devastation. And the worst part was, she had almost succeeded with us. If I hadn't taken the time to really dig into her history, to uncover the pattern of her behavior, we might have been the next victims on her ever-growing list. As I sat there stewing in my own anger and disbelief, a new realization slowly dawned on me. This wasn't just about protecting our home anymore. It was about standing up for every person Evelyn had targeted, about ensuring that she couldn't continue to exploit and manipulate vulnerable homeowners for her own gain. I knew then that I had to do something, that I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with it, and so with a renewed sense of purpose, I began to formulate a plan. First, I needed to gather as much evidence as possible to build an ironclad case that would leave no doubt in the HOA's mind about Evelyn's true motives. I pored over every single complaint, every fine, every warning, meticulously documenting every interaction with the association. I also reached out to some of Evelyn's other victims, hoping to get their stories and use them to bolster our case. As the evidence mounted, I could feel a growing sense of confidence and determination take hold. Evelyn had underestimated me, had thought she could just continue her reign of terror without any repercussions, but she was about to learn a very hard lesson, that when you mess with a man's home and his family, you're not just dealing with one person, but an entire community that refuses to be bullied. With the lawyer's guidance, I began to prepare for the showdown with the HOA, knowing that this was a fight I was determined to win. As I pored over the mountain of evidence against Evelyn, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of determination and purpose. This was no longer just about protecting our home. It was about standing up for every person in our community who had fallen victim to Evelyn's predatory tactics. I knew that if I was going to take her down, I would need to be strategic and methodical. This wasn't a fight I could win with a few angry phone calls or a stern letter to the HOA. No, I needed to approach this like a seasoned military commander, carefully planning my attack and anticipating Evelyn's every move. With the guidance of the real estate attorney, I began to map out my plan of action. The first step was to ensure that we were on solid legal footing, that the HOA couldn't simply dismiss our case as a petty dispute between neighbors. The lawyer advised me to continue documenting every single interaction with Evelyn and the association, creating a comprehensive timeline that would clearly demonstrate the pattern of harassment. We need to show the HOA that this isn't just about you and your neighbor, the attorney explained. This is about a systemic abuse of power, one that has been going on for years and has impacted multiple families in this community. As I listened to his words, a spark of inspiration ignited within me. I realized that the key to our success wasn't just in proving Evelyn's misdeeds. It was in enlisting the support of our fellow neighbors, in turning this into a collective fight for the soul of our community. And so I began to reach out to other homeowners, starting with those I knew had been targeted by Evelyn in the past. I shared my findings, my suspicions about her true motives, and I asked for their help in building our case. To my surprise, many of them were eager to join the cause, eager to finally put an end to Evelyn's reign of terror. One by one, they shared their stories, tales of fines and threats, of feeling powerless and helpless in the face of Evelyn's relentless campaign. And as I listened, I could feel my own determination growing stronger, fueled by the knowledge that we were not alone in this fight. With the support of my fellow neighbors, I began to strategize our next moves. The lawyer advised us to file a formal complaint with the HOA, detailing Evelyn's history of harassment and presenting the evidence we had gathered. But we didn't stop there. We also reached out to the local media, hoping to shine a spotlight on the issue and put pressure on the association to take action. The key is to make this a public issue, the attorney said, his eyes gleaming with a hint of mischief. When the HOA sees that this is no longer just a private dispute, but something that could potentially damage their reputation, they'll be a lot more inclined to take it seriously. As we put the final touches on our plan, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. Evelyn had spent years thinking she could get away with her schemes, that she could continue to terrorize her neighbors with impunity. But now she was about to learn a very hard lesson, that when you mess with one member of this community, you mess with all of us. I could practically see the look of panic on her face when she realized that her carefully constructed web of deceit was about to come crashing down around her. And as I imagined that moment, a wry smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. "She's in for the fight of her life," I murmured to Jessica, who was standing beside me, her own eyes alight with a fiery determination. "Good!" she replied, her voice low and resolute. "It's about time someone put that woman in her place." With our plan in place and our fellow neighbors rallying to our cause, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. Evelyn had made the mistake of underestimating us, of thinking that she could continue her predatory behavior without consequence. But now she was about to learn a very hard lesson, that when you mess with a man's home and family, you're not just dealing with one person, but an entire community that refuses to be bullied. As I closed the folder containing our evidence, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The battle was about to begin, and I was more than ready to fight. With the support of my fellow neighbors, I began to strategize our next moves. The lawyer advised us to file a formal complaint with the HOA, detailing Evelyn's history of harassment and presenting the evidence we had gathered. But we didn't stop there. We also reached out to the local media, hoping to shine a spotlight on the issue and put pressure on the association to take action. "The key is to make this a public issue," the attorney said, his eyes gleaming with a hint of mischief. "When the HOA sees that this is no longer just a private dispute, but something that could potentially damage their reputation, they'll be a lot more inclined to take it seriously." As we put the final touches on our plan, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. Evelyn had spent years thinking she could get away with her schemes, that she could continue to terrorize her neighbors with impunity. But now, she was about to learn a very hard lesson, that when you mess with one member of this community, you mess with all of us. I could practically see the look of panic on her face when she realized that her carefully constructed web of deceit was about to come crashing down around her. And as I imagined that moment, a wry smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. "She's in for the fight of her life," I murmured to Jessica, who was standing beside me, her own eyes alight with a fiery determination. "Good," she replied, her voice low and resolute. "It's about time someone put that woman in her place." With our plan in place and our fellow neighbors rallying to our cause, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. Evelyn had made the mistake of underestimating us, of thinking that she could continue her predatory behavior without consequence. But now she was about to learn a very hard lesson, that when you mess with a man's home and family, you're not just dealing with one person, but an entire community that refuses to be bullied. As I closed the folder containing our evidence, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The battle was about to begin, and I was more than ready to fight. In the weeks that followed the explosive HOA meeting, the investigation into Evelyn's conduct proceeded swiftly. The HOA members, now fully aware of the gravity of her actions, were determined to get to the bottom of the matter and hold her accountable. As they delved deeper into the evidence we had provided, a damning portrait began to emerge. Not only had Evelyn systematically targeted her neighbors with frivolous complaints, but she had also been using her position on the HOA board to influence the association's decisions in her favor. It was a level of corruption and self-dealing that left the other members appalled and disgusted. I watched with a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation as the investigation unfolded. On the one hand, I was thrilled to see Evelyn's web of deceit finally unraveling, but on the other, I couldn't help but wonder what her next move would be. This woman had shown herself to be ruthless and relentless, and I knew that she wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, as the HOA prepared to issue its final ruling, Evelyn launched a desperate last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation. She hired a high-powered attorney and filed a lawsuit, claiming that the investigation was biased and the evidence had been fabricated. But the HOA was having none of it. Buoyed by the overwhelming evidence we had presented, they stood firm, issuing a scathing rebuke of Evelyn's actions and banning her from the HOA board. Evelyn Westbrook has engaged in a sustained and malicious campaign of harassment against her fellow homeowners, the HOA president declared in a statement. Her actions have not only violated our community's bylaws, but they have also betrayed the trust and goodwill that should exist between neighbors. As such, we have no choice but to take the strongest possible action. The ruling was a triumph, not just for my family, but for the entire community. Evelyn's reign of terror had finally come to an end, and the other homeowners who had fallen victim to her schemes could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But the victory came at a cost. Evelyn, her pride wounded and her plans foiled, refused to go down without a fight. She continued to harass us, filing frivolous lawsuits and making threatening phone calls. It was a constant source of stress and anxiety, and there were times when I wondered if it was all worth it. Yet, even in the face of Evelyn's relentless attacks, I remained steadfast. This was our home, our sanctuary, and I was damned if I was going to let her take that away from us. With the support of our fellow neighbors and the backing of the HOA, we stood firm, weathering the storm and refusing to be cowed, and in the end our persistence paid off. Evelyn's lawsuits were dismissed one by one, and the HOA's ruling was upheld. She was stripped of her position on the board and ordered to pay hefty fines for her misdeeds. It was a humiliating defeat, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction as I watched her slink away, her tail firmly between her legs. As for our home, it emerged from the ordeal unscathed. The HOA not only reimbursed us for the fines and penalties we had incurred, but they also issued a formal apology for their role in enabling Evelyn's harassment. And with the threat of her interference finally lifted, our property value began to rebound, our hard-earned investment in our home once again secure. It was a hard-won victory, to be sure, but one that filled me with a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. We had stood up to a bully, and we had won, and in doing so we had not only protected our own home, but we had also sent a message to the entire community that they could no longer be taken advantage of, that they had the power to fight back and reclaim what was rightfully theirs. As I looked around at the familiar, comforting surroundings of our home, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of appreciation and gratitude. This wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary, a reflection of our hard work and our dreams. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew that we would always be ready to defend it, to protect what we had built, no matter the cost.